This is Echo Zoe Radio, episode 168 for April 2022, with Andrew Rappaport on Apologetics.
Welcome to Echo Zoe Radio, the podcast outreach of Echo Zoe Ministries, where you'll hear about important topics affecting the church today. Our primary goal is to explore a variety of issues while remaining faithful to God and His Word. Stay with us for the next hour as your host, Andy Olson, shares his conversation with this month's guest. Here's your host, Andy Olson.
I'm Andy Olson. Thanks for listening to Echo Zoe Radio. This is episode 168 for April 2022. Andrew Rappaport is back. Andrew has been on the show many times before, and he returns this month to talk about apologetics. Andrew is founder and president of Striving for Eternity Ministries, which focuses on evangelism, outreach, and education. This episode should be on Rumble if you wish to catch the video, as well as the Echo Zoe Locals page in both audio and video formats. If you're seeing it on YouTube, come on over and subscribe to Echo Zoe on Rumble as well. Video will continue to go up on YouTube, but I'm putting more emphasis on Rumble and Locals in an effort to stay ahead of big tech censorship. Also, in regards to social media, you can find Echo Zoe on Twitter, Gab, Parler, Getter, and Telegram. And earlier this week, we created an account at Truth Social. But because it's such a fresh account, it's a long way from being active. So go ahead and follow at Echo Zoe, and once we are approved, that account will come alive and you'll already be following. Also, you can find an up-to-date list of all these various websites at echozoe.com/linktree. I've talked in the past about the Echo Zoe Locals page quite a bit, and I wanted to announce one more reason to come on over and join us. I've shared in the past that Locals page has a paywall and explained that for the most part, anything that's behind the paywall at echozoe.com is also behind the paywall at Locals, which is to say that anything that's not in front of the or behind the paywall on one isn't behind the paywall on the other as well. That continues to be the case, how we're treating that paywall over there. The big incentive to come on over to Locals right now, though, is that I've just uploaded the film Jerusalem's King to the video section of the Locals page. If you haven't seen Jerusalem's King yet, now's the time to see it. We just finished the sequel, and those of us who worked on the sequel, which is called The Conquest, were treated to do a cinematic screening about a week ago. I don't yet have a broad release date for The Conquest, but it will be soon. So come on over to Locals and watch Jerusalem's King and be ready for The Conquest. And I can't neglect to mention that if you get an account going on Locals and follow Echo Zoe Ministries, there is a pinned comment that goes up every month with a promo code so you can come behind the paywall for free. So the term paywall isn't even entirely accurate. But come on over, use the code, get a chance to see Jerusalem's King for free, as well as all the other resources available at Locals. Jerusalem's King is already up at the time that I'm recording this. It is scheduled to go live on Friday, April 15th. So if you're hearing this after April 15th, it's up there and you can go use the promo code and you can see it. And all of the other video resources that are in the Echo Zoe store are also on Locals as well. The show notes for this episode are available at echozoe.com/168. That's where you'll find an outline of the discussion, a list of the scriptures that we refer to during the show, additional resources, related episodes, all that kind of stuff goes into the show notes. So check that out at echozoe.com/168. And with that, here's my discussion with Andrew. Andrew Rappaport. It's been, 4 months since we talked?
Andy Olson. Yes, it has.
Well, you were giving me grief on the round table about Fred possibly passing you in appearances on Echo Zoe Radio.
Well, that's just because I like to give you grief. I know. If I do tie with Fred, I would just find something else. When we get to this year's roundtable, I'll just find something else. That's
I get the game.
So I had to look it up. You've only been on 2 other times aside from the roundtables. 4 roundtables and then 2 actual, just you and me talking.
Then Fred totally has me beat.
And on that, I think he does.
But you have to consider that first time we did like a whole nother show of talking and teaching you how to use Logos Bible software afterwards. So, doesn't that count for an episode?
Well,
even if you didn't record it?
I didn't put that on my feed. I don't think it counts.
It doesn't count. Oh,
Isn't that on your YouTube channel?
Well, that's just not that session, but yeah, I have plenty there. So
is it still there? You redid your YouTube channel a while back.
Yeah. And we're getting ready to get off of YouTube altogether, because they're so wonderful towards Christian values.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I have been really of the mind that anybody who's on YouTube, and this goes for you, but anybody listening who's on YouTube, or anybody who knows anybody who's on YouTube, to get on other sites and do your YouTube and your other site. I use Rumble. I like Rumble. On my last several episodes, I think since our roundtable, I've been putting them up on Rumble more. I've been focusing on Rumble. And I really encourage people to be on both, so that when you're on and you're telling people, hey, I'm on YouTube and on Rumble, and then YouTube takes you down, all your viewers, all your audience will know, oh, he's been saying for months, I'm on Rumble too.
Well, here's the thing you can also do. I tried Rumble, don't like it so much. Can't do playlists and things, but I am on Odyssey.
Yeah.
Odyssey. Now, Odyssey is using blockchain. So the nice thing about it is when you put a video up, someone can't just take it down.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a nice thing about it. The other nice thing about it is if you're still using YouTube, it automatically goes over to Odyssey as long as it's under 2 hours. So my cool. Apologetics live show, sometimes that goes over 2 hours. And so those I would have to manually move over. But that's nice. It syncs everything. So if you have a lot of videos like we have at Striving for Eternity, man, that's a pain to, I was just afraid, I do not want to have to move them all over to Rumble.
Mm-hmm.
And that thought just was too much. But with Odyssey, you just put it in, say, here's where my YouTube channel is, and it just sucks it all out.
Cool.
Very nice.
And I've been asking people, I'm on YouTube, I'm on Rumble. I've been asking, does anybody on either BitChute or Odyssey and want me to start putting videos there too? And I have not heard a word from anyone, so I haven't gotten on either one.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, this is the problem that, there's all these, everyone's trying to create parallel platforms. And I get it, and I understand. But there's just too many people still using the original platforms. And that's the thing. And so it's really hard to say we're going to be able to create something different that's going to get I'm on Truth Social, and it still doesn't get, the attention. I'm on, Getter and Gap and all these others.
Mm-hmm.
And you just don't get there's just not enough people on it. What I found is Parlay and Truth Social and all, they're so political. There's Christians on, there's Christians on them. It's just most of the people went there for political reasons. And so
because they were driven off of Twitter and Facebook. And
yes. YouTube. Yeah. And so that's sort of the thing is I feel like I'm not really finding the audience that would be what I'd be looking for there.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
but I think that on a platform level, that is a problem. But as a content creator, little old you and little old me, we can kind of leverage that where you're on Odyssey, I'm on Rumble, and we can just be using YouTube to make sure that our audiences know where to go if and when YouTube ever decides that they don't want us there anymore.
Well, they've kind of decided they don't want us. They're just trying to wait to get rid of us. So the thing is what I think, I'm in a position where I'm trying to move off, and I'm going to start trying to move Apologetics Live over to Odyssey and get everything over there. That's the goal.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is that it's good to have all these, this is why I think totally off topic here, folks, but we're supposed to be talking apologetics, but
we'll get there.
Elon Musk with what he did, it's very interesting buying the shares of Twitter and being a major shareholder. So he's the largest shareholder. And this is what you need. You need some people that are even somewhat conservative, because Elon Musk isn't really conservative. He's more libertarian. But he's fed up with the nonsense. And the thing that you see is you need to get people like that are willing to buy these companies and change them. Now, it's interesting because what Elon Musk did, everyone's saying like Elon bought the company so he can have some vote and say, except for what I understand, the type of shares he bought doesn't give him a vote. It's just like an investor. And so I guess what it is, hey, I own these shares. If you don't do what I want, I sell them all and your stock tanks.
Yep.
And so, yeah, shareholders you think shareholders are going to pay attention to that. But the problem is,
it's not the shareholders though.
It's the board and things. But here's the thing.
It's
these
the executives.
People don't care. Yeah, but they don't care.
No, they do care, because a lot of these people aren't necessarily paid like a traditional salary. They're paid in things like stock options. And if they are counting on stock options coming in, and Elon knows that, well, this guy is not, he shouldn't have the job to begin with. If he dumps that 9.2% that he bought, the day of or the day before the options become available, and those people aren't going to get any compensation at all, because those options are going to be worthless.
Yes, but here's the thing. These guys are doing things that they know don't help the company. I mean, like you look at Disney and what they've done recently, right? They know they're turning off their primary audience, but it's like, well, hey, but we're keeping employees happy. Hey, good job. Employees are happy that you're being a knucklehead. I mean, it's bad business, but they don't seem to care right now. And that's concerning. Now, there's some reasons for this. And this goes back to Barack Obama, and very few people really realize this. He said he wanted to fundamentally change America. Mm-hmm. And everyone thought they knew what that meant, and no one knew what that actually meant. Here's how he fundamentally changed America. He got businesses to push his political agenda. And it's like, oh, don't worry, you lose money, we subsidize you. Now, you have a business. Hey, I get guaranteed money from the government or possible money from a customer. Well, I'll go with guaranteed money. And so they start pushing his agenda. That's really what's been going on.
And you know how he did that? He won over the big investment firms, the BlackRock and the Vanguard, where you take your IRA or your 401k and you stick it in Vanguard, and you're buying a bunch of mutual funds, and you got all these stocks that you own via mutual funds. Stocks generally come with voting privileges when they come up for the board members' terms are up. And normally, if you just go on like an E-Trade or a Schwab or whatever, and you buy you buy Twitter, or you buy Coca-Cola, or you buy Home Depot, they're going to send you a notice that says, hey, board elections are up. Go on and cast your vote as a shareholder. But if you're in a mutual fund, the mutual fund manager gets to cast those votes. They get to use your shares to reshape the company. And the CEO of BlackRock has been very vocal lately that he's leveraging that. He's putting pressure on companies to do what he wants, because he's got the voting shares via his investors. And his investors can't. The only thing that investors can do that I'm aware of is take their money out and invest through somebody else, or invest directly where they would get that vote.
Yeah, well,
it's really dirty.
This is how. There's other ways he did things where it was quite interesting. Where folks don't really know some of this stuff, because this isn't the things the media is going to talk about. But he would basically, he did money laundering. He basically used the government to say that they're going to come after some company, but if you donate money to this liberal cause, we're going to let these fines go.
Yep.
And so, basically. Well, let's see. I could give a donation to this liberal cause, and that gets them money, and I pay less than I would for a fine or other things.
That they 30% or something. You pay 30% over to these guys, make the donation. We let it go away.
We let it go, That's basically money laundering. And that, so yeah, these are things that news doesn't report because they're in on it. So apologetics.
Yeah. So apologetics. I did this show with Cy Ten Bruggencate back in 2013 because I had just really had presuppositional apologetics articulated through some of the materials that he'd done and did a show. And I know you do a lot of the similar, very presuppositional apologetics. And so I'd like to talk with you about that, get a little different perspective on a similar subject.
Yeah. Yeah. I know a lot of people think it's funny when I teach apologetics, people think that I got it from Cy Ten Bruggencate. And I always have to tell people, no, I've been teaching it longer than Cy knew what it was. Some people think like it started with him. No, he made it like lay level.
Right.
But it didn't say, like, my seminary professor had his PhD in presuppositional apologetics. So it was really fun when he asked me to come in and teach a class. And I'm like, you want me to come in? You got a PhD in this. And what am I going to teach that you can? I was like really surprised by it. And he said, look, I teach it in a classroom. You do it on the streets. There's a difference. And so I was like, point taken. Okay.
Well, as far as Cy, I always saw Cy as being kind of like how Ray Comfort is on evangelism. Ray Comfort didn't invent evangelism, but he brought it down to a level that average Christians can really understand it and feel like they can do it. And that's what Cy did more for presupposition apologetics.
Well, and the same thing that Ray did, you see the video clips just doing the good person test with Ray. People think that's like all Ray does. People think like Ray just gets up there and it's like, so you're a good person. No, that's not actually all he does. That's just all the clips because that's what he's trying to teach. And so if you go out with Ray and evangelize with him, you see that there's a lot more that he'll do. He does, he gathers the crowd, then he'll joke. He'll tell, he jokes around a lot. And if you know Ray, it's just, that's his nature. He can't help but joke around. But, people think like, oh, I can reproduce what these guys do. And when they get out on the street, they take what they hear, and what they're hearing is an outline. And they take that, and then when someone challenges them, they go, I don't know what to do. So when they see what like a Cy Ten Bruggencate will do, and they're like, well, how do you know that's true? Yeah. And if someone throws something that they weren't expecting, they don't understand the why. And I'd see this a lot where at first it worked really well because the professing atheist just didn't know how to answer. But then they figured out answers. And then it was the Christians going, because they didn't understand what's behind presuppositional apologetics. They understood the outline because they watched these videos where it was clips of it. And that's where, it helps to understand what presuppositional apologetics is. And so let me give some definitions. We have three main branches of apologetics. You have evidentialists, you have classicalists, and you have presuppositionalists. So let's start with the evidentialist. An evidentialist is going to be someone who believes that, basically, to bring it down to simple terms, that I can use evidence to convince you into the kingdom. In other words, if I give you enough evidence, you will believe that God is real, that Christianity is right, and that you need to repent. You just need the evidence.
Who might be a well-known evidential apologist?
Well, you have William Lane Craig is probably the best known. You'd have, and now I'm going to mention people I know personally. So I'm saying that just because I mention people and they're evidentialists, they do it differently than me. It doesn't mean they're bad, but people I know personally, guys like Jim Wallace goes by as an author. He's J. Warner Wallace, not to be confused with the liberal Jim Wallace. But Greg Kokel, they would rely on evidence. Frank Turek. So these are guys that are looking at the evidence. And now Frank is in a little bit of a different boat. Maybe he's more getting into the classical approach because he has written a book recently. Well, now it's not all that recent, but he wrote a book that kind of sounds more like a precept book. And so maybe he's starting to move that direction a bit.
Yeah, but now you just said both classical and precept. So
Well, I don't know if he's moving to precept or if it was just like I never talked to him about that book, so and why he wrote it. So I just could look at what the book says, right?
Sure.
Then you have classicalists. You'd have your R.C. Sproul as a classicalist, and the classicalist is kind of in between the precept and evidential. So they're going to use the evidence and say that if you have enough evidence, but they don't want to put God on trial type of thing, and so they're going to look for the evidence. They're going to make more evidential arguments, but with the starting point that God exists. And so a presuppositionalist is going to say, okay, we start with the presupposition. Now, my presuppositions is that I have two presuppositions I start with when doing apologetics. God exists, he has spoken. What do I mean by that? Every single human being, I enter into it knowing that they know those two things. God exists and he has spoken. And so I'm going to argue from that point of view. So the key difference is, do we put the unbeliever in the position where they get to act as judge over God? So if I'm giving them the evidence, it's just they need to make the right decision. If I give them the evidence, they're going to be able to see what's right. They're the judge. When what Romans 1 tells me is they already know God exists, they just suppress that truth in unrighteousness. So I just point that out. And I don't give up the scriptures in the discussion. So you'll hear people, William Lane Craig, would say this is, he can prove God without the Bible. Okay, but why would you want to? Right? I mean, you have the truth. Why would you want to enter into this realm of what they claim as neutrality? And you'll notice what they'll say if you're talking to an unbeliever is, like step into a position of neutrality. You give up your Bible and then argue from there. And you go, well, wait a minute, stop, hold it. Let me get this straight. You want me to give up the truth to enter into your
the truth?
Yeah. In your world of untruth. Okay, fine. Then let's talk biology, and you get rid of all of your biology textbooks. They're not going to agree to that. And what it is I feel that what many are trying to do is they say there's this area of neutrality where we can argue on level playing field. And the answer is we can't, because they don't give up their worldview. They ask us to give up our worldview, and many Christians go, okay, we could do that. So my point from a presuppositional position is I start with the fact that I know from God that they know God exists. So when I enter into the discussion, I was just at Purdue University, and this young lady told me that she's an atheist. And I said, no, you're not. You're someone who suppresses the truth and unrighteousness. She's like, how could you tell me what I believe? I said, it's not me telling you what you believe. It's the God who created you who tells me what you believe. And he cannot lie. And you can. Therefore, I'm going to trust him and not you. And she was so upset with that. Now you have to understand, she was claims to be a trans. And so, which made this discussion easier. But what I said is, I can prove to you, you're not an atheist. And she was like, you cannot. I said, okay, I can. But I said, so as an atheist, you believe that everything we see is just pure chemical reactions, correct? It's just a material world? Yes. You don't believe in the immaterial world, right? She goes, you mean like a soul? Well, just anything that's immaterial, but the soul would be one of them. She goes, no, that doesn't exist. Okay. So things like an ability to reason, truth, knowledge, laws of logic, morality, all those are immaterial things. So you don't believe in any of them, right? So you want to have a reasonable conversation, but you want to rely on something that's immaterial, which right there ends your argument. And she's like, no, those are just chemical reactions in the brain. Okay, well, we could get into that. And there are ways to get into that. But instead, what I decided to do, and this has been the argument I've been using recently, to prove that they believe in a material world. I said, okay, so me as a biological male, all of my chemicals and chemical reactions would be male. Do you believe that I can, as a biological male, biologically, can I identify as a female? And she's like, yes, psychology teaches us this. And I said, psychology? You mean the study of the soul? She's like, what? I said, yeah, that's what psychology means. Psyche, soul, ology, study of the soul. You just caved in on that. And she then told me that my statement was transphobic. And I went, wait a minute, but you agree with my statement? She goes, no, I don't. I said, so you believe that biologically a male can identify as a female? She goes, yes, using psychology. I said, you missed the point. You said the statement, biologically a man can identify as a woman, was transphobic. And yet you have to appeal to psychology, which is the study of the soul. So biologically, can we? The answer was no. Okay, you're transphobic. And which she got very upset. And she said, I can't be transphobic because I'm trans. I said, but you just said the statement's inherently transphobic. She goes, well, I'm a trans, so I get to make the definition. I went, oh, so you're an anti-Semite. You want to kill Jewish people. She went, what? How could you say such a thing? I said, because I'm Jewish and I get to make the definition. She goes, oh, we're playing that game? I said, well, no, you were playing that game. I just joined you. Right? This is what we're dealing with. But notice what I'm doing. I'm putting them in a position where they know. So many of these people want to say that if everything's just the material world, but they know it's not the case. Because when you appeal to someone that is biologically male, and if just material world, everything in our body would be male. We would think male. We would act male. We would be male. How do we identify female? Where does that come in? That's an appeal to the immaterial. So anytime they say that, guess what? They're appealing to something that's outside of their worldview. They've just given up their atheism. And it does frustrate them when they understand that.
Yeah. I mean, when you show somebody they're inconsistent, that's obviously going to frustrate them.
Well, then they call you transphobic.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, and I said to him, I'm not afraid of trans people. That's not what it means. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we could just keep changing definitions. But notice what I did in that. Not once did I give up the existence of God. Not once do I give up that God has spoken. So notice when she tells me she's an atheist, I just flatly tell her, no, she's not. And God said so. Now, she already knows that. See, because God said she knows that. Mm-hmm. And that's the advantage that I have. This actually makes it so much easier for me to do apologetics when I'm out on the street, because I walk into the discussion knowing that God has spoken. Yeah. It's like walking into a test and, with all the answers. Okay, here's the answer key. Okay, let me look it up. Okay, I just fill in right. I don't believe in God. God says different. And you're not there. And notice, they're not arguing. They want to put it on me. You're saying I don't believe in God. No, God says you don't believe. You believe in God. It's not what I say. I'm going right back to Scripture. Your argument is with God, not with me. All I am is the messenger. So that does a couple things for people that are afraid to be out on the street. One, man, the pressure's all off of me.
Yeah,
it's on that person to have to answer.
Now, I was looking through the show notes for that episode I did with Cy, and I had made a point specifically that neither one of us, neither I nor Cy, knew if presuppositional apologetics is the same as covenantal apologetics, or if there are some subtle differences.
No. But I mean, in fact, my professor, who has a PhD in it, wouldn't be covenantal at all. He would be dispensational, and he wouldn't be Calvinistic.
Sure.
And yet he teaches it. So there's people that try to make the claim that somehow this is a covenantal or reformed apologetic. It's just a biblical one.
Just trying to own something that.
Yeah, maybe, but the reality is, what does Romans 1 say? It says that everyone knows God exists, so they're without excuse. There's no need to appeal to a covenant or a dispensational type of interpretation to come to just read that as it is.
Right.
So I don't think it's that you can make the argument that it's purely covenantal or reformed or dispensational, for that matter. It is. Okay. It's a clear interpretation of Scripture is what it is.
Now, another thing that was going through my mind as you were describing that is, I find so often I kind of end up coming back to things boiling down to the original lie in the garden. When the serpent told Eve, "You'll be like God." He says, "You'll be like God, knowing the difference between you'll know good from evil," in an experiential sense. But even just that first part of what he's saying, "You will be like God," that so much of this sinful world seems to boil down to this false promise that people want, that they'll be like God. And as you're describing this trans person who's denying psychology but then appealing to psychology, it seems almost as if she's trying to be like God, that she can pick and choose when to use certain logic, when it applies and when it doesn't. And it just boils down basically to when I want it to apply, it applies.
Well, that's what they're all trying to do. I mean, they're trying to say that they get to set the rules, because if they can set the rules, then they can say God doesn't exist. And guess what? I win because God doesn't exist. Right. And so it's a thing where what they're doing is in a sense no different than how the serpent tried to deceive Eve. But here's the thing: many people don't notice this. But first off, Adam was told from God not to eat of the fruit of one tree, right?
Yep.
You can eat of any fruit, he said. You can eat of all the fruits of the garden, except the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now, many people blame Eve for saying that you can't touch it. We don't know where she got that. Maybe that was Adam. Maybe Adam said, you can't eat it, don't even touch it. Maybe that came from Adam, that addition to God's word. A lot of people focus on that and say Eve did something. But what a lot of people miss is what Satan actually said. Let me read to you what Satan said in there. Indeed, has God said, you shall not eat from any tree of the garden. Very subtle, but do you notice what he did? Now, how many trees can she eat from? All of the trees except one. What does this Satan do? He makes it all about that one. If you can't eat from that one, you can't eat from any, right?
Right.
Did God say you can't eat from any of the trees? No, you can eat from all of them except one. This is what we end up seeing people do. You have the egalitarians that will sit in churches and say, well, what if I can't be a pastor or a preacher, then I can't do anything in church. No, you could do everything but that. Mm-hmm. Right? But they focus in on the one thing that God says, no, you can't do. And so here, what God says for the unbelievers, yeah, you must repent. Well, they want to focus on anything but that, right? So it's like, well, I can decide. God says He's in control, well, and I can decide I'm in control. No, you're not. And this is what you raised is something you're going to find on the street over and over and over again. People are going to try to create a God of their own liking, a God that they can submit to because they created him. Mm-hmm. When someone on the street tells me, well, my God would never send someone to hell, I usually agree with them. I go, you're right, because your God doesn't exist.
Right.
So he can't send anybody to hell.
So I didn't have a follow-up question, but I want to get deeper into this. Well, maybe we'll go here. You talked about classical a little bit. You touched on classical. What more would differentiate classical from either evangelical, evidentiary,
evidential versus
or presuppositional?
Yeah. I think the main thing is the way the evidence is used. Okay. And so I'm not going to put an unbeliever in the position where he's a judge over whether God exists or not, or whether he's spoken or not. The other thing I'm not going to do, and a classicalist will do this part, is to give up the scripture and try to argue on a level playing field. I don't do that. I have the truth. The truth comes from God, and God cannot lie. I'm not giving that up for anything, because I go in there knowing, and this is what comforts me when I get into discussions, I go in there knowing I have the truth. And the argument that they have is not with me, so the pressure's not on me. So I don't feel like, I gotta win a debate. Mm-hmm. I just say, sorry, God disagrees with you.
So that's how classical would be like evidentiary. How is it more? You say it's kind of in the middle. How is it then like presupposition?
In the middle, that they're usually they're not going to put God on trial. A lot of classicalists will start that God exists.
Okay.
But that he has spoken, maybe we need to prove that out.
Okay.
And now this is a thing you get some, you get some presuppositionalists, and I mean, Sai used to say this. I'm glad he doesn't say it anymore, but he used to say that, evidence is a sin. No, it's not. I mean, Jesus used evidence. There's a proper way to use evidence. I use evidence to expose that their worldview is false.
Sure.
I'll use evidence to show that, what claims they're making are not valid. So in other words, this girl at Purdue, we started a discussion on abortion, and she said, well, it's, a man can't decide what a woman gets to do with her body. Now, by the way, I've come up with a new argument for that nowadays. Next time I hear that, I'm just going to go, well, so I can talk about what a woman could do with her body as long as I identify as a woman, right? I don't have to be a woman. I could just identify. Because how do you define a woman? Because now even a Supreme Court justice doesn't want to define a woman. No one wants to define what a woman is. So, we could just ask, what's a woman? But what I had said to this girl was, I said, so you're saying a man can't decide. So men don't have the right to decide what a woman could do with their body. She says, that's correct. I said, fine. Can you name the female Supreme Court justice that had voted for abortion? Which one of them on Roe versus Wade? Name the woman.
There weren't any women on there.
There were no women. They were all men. And therefore, if you're saying that only a woman could decide, we should immediately outlaw abortion until some women decide. And poll after poll has revealed that, over 60% of women would vote against abortion. So the reality is like, you're saying only a woman could decide, but yet you appeal to the fact that, 7 men decided, right? So you're not being consistent there. Now, what am I doing? I'm using evidence there, aren't I?
Right.
Evidence to prove God exists? No. And here's why. This is the thing for folks to understand. What's the difference? If there's some evidence that can ultimately prove God's existence, then that evidence is greater than God himself. If there's evidence that can ultimately be proved for the scriptures, then that evidence is greater than the scriptures. Now, is there arguments that can be made? Is there evidence we can make that would support that God exists and he has spoken? Yes. As I said to that lady, right? The fact that you want to have a reasonable conversation with me, that you're relying on a God-given ability to reason. And so a lot of times what I'll say to a professing atheist is, because, in the Psalms it says, Psalm 14 and I think it's 52, says that the fool says in his heart, there is no God. Now, part of what that is, in my thinking, is this. You got someone who's using their God-given ability to reason that God doesn't exist. I mean, that's foolishness.
Right.
Right? You can't even reason that statement, God doesn't exist, without first relying on God's giving you an ability to reason, giving you knowledge, giving you truth, giving you the laws of logic in the universe, giving you a system of morality. So where do we get morality from? The nature of God. Where do we get the laws of logic from? The nature of God. Where do we get truth from? The nature of God. Where do we get knowledge from? The nature of God. Right? Where do we get an ability to reason? From God creating us in his image. All of these things require God. So what I'll get sometimes is someone will say, well, no, the laws of logic are just the product of a human brain. Really? Okay, let's test that. And this is where I'm using evidence and I'm using logic to expose the failures of their worldview. So I'll say, okay, there was a time before human beings existed, correct? And they'll say yes. I mean, they think millions of years. I think 6 days, or 5 days. Mm-hmm. So in that time, second law of logic would be what's called the law of non-contradiction. So make it simple. The way it's phrased is you can't have A and not A in the same way at the same time. So let me give an illustration. I can't have $20 in my wallet and not in my wallet at the same time in the same way. Now, I could have had $20 in my wallet and I spent it, so that's not in the same time, right? It's a different time. I could have $20 in my wallet, but it's monopoly money, and we're talking $20 US, that's not in the same way. So Could the universe have existed and not existed at the same time and in the same way before there was a human brain? Now, that's a tough question for them to answer because they have one of two things. They could say no, which is logical, and they now just blew up their whole argument that it's the product of the human brain. Therefore, humans didn't create or invent the laws of logic. It came from the mind of God. It came from his nature. Or they can say yes and accept contradictions. And I've had this happen multiple times. And that's where you can have a little fun, especially if you're doing open air evangelism as I do. Because I remember once I had a gentleman, I said, you're wrong. He said, no, I'm right. I said, no, you're wrong. He said, I'm right. No, you're wrong. He says, I'm right. I said, no, you're wrong. And you can't disagree with me because you accept contradictions. So if you feel that you're right and I must be wrong, you're appealing to my worldview, not your own. Which he really got frustrated with because he really wants to be right and for me to be wrong. Right? But now he's stuck because he just accepts
that how the postmodern mind works.
Yes.
We want to live in a relativistic world where we can decide how the world around us works, but we also want absolutes so that when somebody punches us in the nose, we can appeal that that's wrong to punch somebody in the nose.
Well, we are living in a world now with critical racism theory that says that a man can identify as a woman and that's okay. But then, we have to have a first woman black justice. Well, wait, how do you know she's really a woman?
That was my question. When they asked, how can you define a woman? I'm not a biologist. Well, Biden said he wanted to appoint a black woman. How do we know you fit the description?
Yeah. Well, and I was glad she admitted I'm not a biologist. What I wanted the senator to do is press that.
Yeah.
And say, well, thank you for announcing that it is biologically impossible for a man to be a woman. Right? Because it is.
They want just for saying it's a biological issue at all.
Yeah. They have to appeal to psychology, which psychology is the study of the soul. Okay, well, then you got a problem there. So, but you see how I can use evidence to break down their arguments. I can discuss they believe in millions of years. Really? Okay. How do you explain how come there's so little salt in the water? Why is the moon so close to the earth? Because the moon is moving a little bit further away. I think like an inch and a half every couple of years. Why we get more salt in the water every year. Why is there so little? Why is the moon so close? Why do we still have blue stars which can't last millions of years? Why do we still have comets that are breaking up and they can't last millions of years? Why do we have diamonds that have C14, which they shouldn't have that if they're millions of years old? All these questions we look at and go, these all support a young universe, younger than millions of years. I mean, 6,000 years is still old, but the fact is we could look at these things and that's evidence. But see, that's evidence to expose their worldview, not evidence to prove God exists. Now, are there things that I could argue for the existence of God? Yes, because I start with God's existence, right? So I could look at laws of logic and all these things.
That's the key difference between
correct
your method and the other methods is the evidentiary, the classical.
Correct, because they would end up sometimes saying that, well, we can prove God. No, God exists. You don't prove God. God exists. That's the necessary starting point. If you don't start there, you can't make sense of anything. If you don't start with God's existence, you cannot explain anything that you want to argue because you're appealing to the biblical worldview. You need that necessary. So the first thing the unbeliever has to do is explain how they can have all these immaterial things in their worldview before starting the discussions. Mm-hmm. Explain to me how you have these things. Oh, they're just products of the human mind. No, you're just making that up. That's just, a science of the gaps. You shove it in and say, well, science will figure it out. The answer is they're immaterial and you need an immaterial source for them. So right off the bat, now I'm not proving God's existence. I start and say, God exists, and these things you want to do, you couldn't do without it. Now what I'm going to do is, are there ways we can look to Scripture and say this? Are there evidence to support Scripture? Notice the difference: support versus prove. I can look at prophecies, but see, the reason why you don't want to do this, if I say that, well, I can give evidence to prove the Bible, look at prophecies. All you need is someone that creates another book that has prophecies in it, and look, that must be true too. Right?
Mm-hmm.
That becomes the issue that you have when you have people that are appealing to evidence. I give you good evidence today, but someone else may give you better evidence tomorrow that sounds more convincing. Here's the difference, and this is the key. When I'm giving you evidence and I'm trying to convince you, who is in charge? Me. I'm the one that's going to determine if the evidence is convincing, if I like it, if it appeals to me, I'm going that way. But you're not in charge. You didn't create the universe. So we don't appeal to you. We don't go to you and say, oh, well, we're going to look to you for the proof that of what is in the world. No, we start with God, and it's necessary to start with God. The fact that he has spoken is necessary because we would not know anything about him unless he speaks. He has to reveal himself to us because he's completely utterly different than us. He is separate from us. That's what holiness means. He's holy. He is separate from us. And that's the difference. And people have to recognize that fact. When they make these arguments and stuff, what they're doing is they're appealing to our worldview to then deny our worldview. And that's the foolishness of it. And that's where I find it so much easier as a presuppositionalist, because I don't need to know all the fancy arguments. I don't have to memorize all these things about the dating methods and all the stuff like that I was talking about, the moon and the salt. I don't have to memorize all that. I don't have to know all that. You know what I have to know? The Bible. I know the truth. And then I just compare anything they say to that. And so what do I do to prepare for apologetics? I study the Bible. What does that do? That gets me closer to my God, who I love. It gets me to know him better. And then when I get into a discussion with someone, I just appeal to what I've studied, to what Scripture says. And so here becomes the thing that's nice about this is as we appeal to that, we start off with the fact that we know the truth. So you think about how Secret Service, when they compare, they're going to find counterfeit money. They don't go study monopoly money and,
Right.
They don't study all the counterfeits, right? They study the real deal. And if they know what makes something a real US dollar or US currency, they just have, okay, these are the things that are US currency. It's going to look a certain way. It's going to be a certain type of texture. It's going to have the red and the blue threads in it. It's going to have these different watermarks in it. As long as they know all the things that define it, then all they got to do is compare what they have to the definition. Does it have all of the qualities? Yes, it's legit. No, it's counterfeit. So I don't need to go studying all these evidences. I don't need to go studying all these world religions. I don't need to know everything about that stuff. I just need to know the Bible. And then every time they, making a case, it's like, well, it's not what God says. Right? I mean, it's really what we're looking at saying, but this is what the God of the universe that exists has said. And just leave it at that, because where's their real issue? Their real issue is with God.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to redirect the conversation to say, that's where your issue is. Bring it up with him. Because when we get into these discussions, and notice I'm saying discussions, not debates, because some people want to make it to a debate. And they want to make it between you and them. What am I doing? I'm redirecting it to them and God, because they don't have an evidence issue. They have a spiritual issue. I can give them evidence all day long. Won't convince them at all as long as they think they get to choose.
Yep.
Right? They're the ones that's going to decide. No, you're not. You're going to submit. Either now, you're going to bow your knee now, or you're going to bow your knee in death. That's what God has said. But every man will bow his knee. And so you are going to either repent or perish. That's it. And it's not me being the bad guy here. I'm just telling you what God said. Right? Notice though, in that discussion, as I go through it, all the focus goes back to God. Right? It's what he has said. Now, if they say, well, you only believe that because God said it in a book. Yeah, but he can't lie. Can you? Yes? Okay. I'll believe the guy who can't lie and created the universe, puts breath in your lungs. I'll believe him over you. He might be a little bit smarter than you since he's completely absolutely knowledgeable of everything. He knows what he's doing.
Yeah. Well, I was going to direct you to what you just said for the last 5 minutes. And that was to circle back to the beginning. And you talked about people who watch videos of Ray Comfort or Saitan Bruggencate and think that looks so easy. And then get out there and try to do it and realize I didn't, I got asked a question I didn't know how to deal with. And I think you answered that quite well, that you just got to know the Bible. You got to understand God's word. And from there you can do it. But again, even with that great answer, there's kind of a difference between the head knowledge and the experience and getting out and actually doing it. So how would you advise somebody who sees this and says, hey, I want to go like share my faith with people and I want to interact with people on the street and I want to do what you do?
Well, basically go out and do it. Right? I mean, that's really what it comes down to.
Like riding a bike, just really, you recognize you're going to fall over a bunch of times before you keep the wheels up.
Yeah, and you are. I mean, look, I usually, when I get up and do open air in New York City, I would start this way. I'd get up on a box and I just announce very loudly, I can answer any question you have about God and the Bible. And inevitably a crowd comes and someone will ask me a really, really difficult question. And I'll go, I don't know. And they go, you said you can answer anything. And I'll just turn and say, well, I think I don't know is a perfectly good answer. Don't you? Right. And it is. Yeah. And so the thing to realize is don't be afraid. You can say, I don't know. I'll look into it.
Yeah.
And generally they don't actually care for the answer anyway.
Right. And that's a good point, because you can always let that person know if you genuinely want to know the answer. If it's not just a rhetorical debate tactic that you threw that out there, you really want to know the answer, I will go research it for you. Give me your number, give me your email address. We'll get back in touch once I figured out how to respond.
I do that all the time, and they almost never want to give you that email address. and so what you end up seeing is start with the fact that you're speaking from the truth. Number one. Number two, that they know it's true. So you don't have to sit there and have this debate and discuss. God says you know this. He exists. He has spoken. You know this already. You may be suppressing that in unrighteousness, but that's between you and God. Mm-hmm. Third, you don't have to have an answer to everything. You can say, I don't know. Perfectly fine. You can go research whatever question you didn't know, go study it and get an answer next time. People sit there and say, oh, I can never do, what you do on the streets. Yes, you can. Do it like every day or weekly for 30 years and you'll get good like me. It's not that I'm good. It's not that there's something special about me. It's just that I've been doing it for so long. You hear the same arguments over and over and over. There's like almost nothing new. And so, I mean, they do come up with some things, now that with all the, when I had the woman who, I tried to explain there were no women no women judges that decided that. She turned to me and her response was, you're oppressing me. I'm oppressing you?
What does that have to do with the fact that the 9 justices in 1973 were all men?
I'm like, how am I oppressing you? That's your cis male gender privilege. And I just looked at her, I said, who said I'm a male? And she just stopped. Like she didn't know what to do with that. So you can have fun on the streets too.
Mhm.
And what I actually find is when you do have fun, when you're using humor like that, it actually lightens the conversation so that they're not as argumentative. And it'll soften it. We mentioned Ray Comfort. Ray does that all the time, uses humor.
Mhm.
I mean, but that's Ray's personality as well. I mean, he's like that, whether he's on the box or whether you're sitting and having lunch with him. That's just how he is.
Yep.
But that does have an advantage in that it will ease the conversation so it's less combative. And then you're getting into the goal of it is, and remember, the goal is always to get to the gospel. The goal is not to win a debate. What good is winning a debate if they go to hell?
Right.
Nothing. I mean, the goal of this is that we get to the gospel message. And so how do we use the apologetics? We use the apologetics to shut the mouth of the ignorant so that we could get to the gospel. That's the goal of it, is just to shut that mouth. And so in that case, we're trying to get them to just shut their mouth. They think because everything in their culture has told them that they're in this position of strength. They're in this position where they can make arguments, and we have to defend. When the reality is, we're standing on the truth. We're standing on the firmest foundation. They need to defend how they can have their worldview, because their worldview makes absolutely no sense. They're actually borrowing from our worldview to make their arguments. And so that's how I appeal to them is not, I don't give in. I don't sit there and even, we'll prove God exists. You know he exists.
Mhm.
And I've seen it. I've seen where people will admit to that.
That's what I was wondering is like how, when you're out, you said you've been doing this for many, many years. You do it a lot. How often do you encounter reaching that goal where you stop the mouth and now they're more receptive to getting to the gospel?
Well, it depends on the person. Because
But generally speaking, I mean, when you're out, say you talk to 100 people, how many would you anticipate would realize that you've got a stronger answer and maybe submit and then listen to that gospel message?
Well, it's not so much that I'm looking to convince them that I have a stronger answer, but that it's true. And I think there's going to be plenty of people that will, be in heaven, and I won't know it because they walked away, right? And so I have no clue.
Right. Well, I understand that. And I understand also that you're on, providentially, you're there talking to one person, but the Lord might have providentially put you there because somebody else was just going to overhear the conversation. And that was his intended argument
all the time. Yeah.
That's his intended audience. But just generally speaking, I think that, when we're out sharing the gospel with people, admit it, we want to see somebody receptive to the gospel.
We do, but a lot of times we don't see that reception. They walk away, and then unless there's someone we know and we can continue having conversations. So a lot of times that reception comes later, but there are times on the street. I mean, look, I've been going to New York.
What I'm getting at is, even if you're out there and you talk to 1,000 people and you have no idea that, 100 of them later went and sought out a pastor somewhere because they had further questions.
Yeah. I mean,
you don't know that, but out of say you talk to 1,000, is there one that you might?
Well, let me give you some few stats that I can appeal to. Is I've been going to New York City, to Union Square, for like 13 years, same place for 13 years. We've had 7 people reach out to us and tell us that they got saved. Now, those are the people that were regulars there because they knew they got our names. They figured out how to get in touch with us, And
I think that's a cool answer. I mean, 13 years, 7 people. It doesn't sound cool, but it is a cool answer.
Yeah, one of the coolest ones was this. I had at my seminary, we had a conference, and they had Mark Dever and speaking, and Mark brought a couple of his interns, and one of his interns got up, and each intern would get up before Mark spoke to share their testimony. And what we ended up seeing was there was a guy who gets up and says, well, I was saved at, I think it was University of Penn, and I got saved listening to some preacher at this place called The Hub, and I was angry with him. I yelled at him, and I left. And then, I ended up leaving school, and, for days I couldn't sleep. I couldn't get what he was saying out of my head. And I went and got a Bible and read it and got saved. And I'm going, wow. And that was like 18 years ago from when he told me the story.
Mm-hmm.
I went up to him. I said, look, there weren't many of us doing this 18 years ago. I mean, Ray Comfort made it popular, but he wasn't even in the States 18 years ago from the time I had this conversation with him.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, tell me details of where you were. And so I actually was able to put this man, who's now a pastor at Mark Dever's church, in touch with the guy who was preaching.
Awesome.
Like 18 years later, it was a great email to email and be like, Jeff, this is Pastor Mike, or I forget the names now, but it was like, I think those are names, but I'm probably wrong. But, just to be able to send an email to these two guys and be like, here you go. And this guy was like, wow, like I didn't know,
Yeah.
and the pastor was like, I didn't know how to get a hold of you. Like,
now, the reason why I say even 7 is a cool number, even though it doesn't sound like it, you put years and years and years of work in that, is if you think about how many times do we hear, I'm going to go to politics just for a moment, but we all get really whipped up about the next the next election. And we hear that, well, if you can just take 2 people to the polls and to vote for our guy, and if they can get 2 people to the polls, and then those people can get 2 people to the polls, how awesome would it be we would win?
And then the Democrats would just bring a truckload of fake ballots,
Yeah.
and it wouldn't matter how many you bring to the polls. So
sure, but my point is, if you just think about if you can say 7 people came to the Lord, are saved, they will be with us in heaven. They are your treasure stored up in heaven. If each of those 7 people got 7 people over the course of a lifetime, I'm not even talking a year or every time you go out, just over the course of a lifetime, 7 people, if you can get 7 people into the kingdom, and everybody who gets into the kingdom also gets 7 people, how long before the whole earth would come under the gospel that people would be?
Well,
I mean,
so yeah, it mathematically, I don't know if I could find this quickly. It'd be a neat thing to.
And I think my point is, I think that when we think about evangelism, I think sometimes we put pressure on ourselves that, well, I want to see 1,000 people before I leave this earth. I want to see 1,000 people come to Christ.
Well, the problem is that who is it that saves, right? It's God who saves.
Yeah, and
that's the problem people have. But with what you're saying,
I agree. But even just for the encouragement of knowing, for whatever your reason, I want to see 1,000 people.
So in one of my talks, I have a slide it starts with, okay, if you start with 25 people share the gospel every day, 364 days a year, they're sharing the gospel, and 3 people get saved. That's less than 1%.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Less than 1%.
Oh yeah.
But this is the idea of, if you're just being faithful to going out every day, you get rejected tons of times. 3 people over 364 days, less than 1% get saved. But you take those 25, they do that. Those 3 people all do that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
13 years, the entire United States is saved. 18 years, the entire world is saved.
Right. And that's kind of what I'm getting at in a
but the problem is,
sort of way.
We're not faithful enough to go out there and share the gospel every day. I had for many years, I had a policy that I would share the gospel at least once a day and a gospel tract, something. Now, granted, I kind of got little legalistic with it. And it's like, it'd be like 11 o'clock at night. And I'd be like, I didn't share the gospel today. Okay. I'd run out to
get some milk or something so that I got a chance to hand over
I
a
didn't
tract.
even bother. I'd just go right into the 7-Eleven, just walk right up to, the person behind the counter, because they're bored out of their mind at that time anyway. Or you go into a hotel and the person at the front desk, and I would just start a conversation with them, hand them a gospel tract, something. But, people will ask me, man, I wish I had these stories like you have of sharing the gospel, because there's a lot of things I could tell, crazy stories of things that have happened. If you're like, I wish that I had those stories. You can just go out every day. Like, just go out more often.
Right.
When you go out a lot, you're going to have the stories, because the craziness always happens. It's just, if you don't go out, you're not going to have any stories. Right. It's just that simple. So we need to be out there. We need to be sharing the gospel.
And then my point was just like thinking about serving the Lord and doing that, and don't be discouraged by, when I say 7 people over 13 years is cool. I'm trying to show that.
Yeah,
it's not.
Oh, I think it's really neat. There's nothing better than having.
And that's the ones you know about. I mean,
that's the ones I know about. Having a guy that, sends you an email. Hey, my name's Michael. I used to be one of the hecklers with Solomon, and I don't know if you remember me. And the answer is yes, I do remember Michael. Yep. And he's like, I just want to let you know, I got saved. I'm faithful to my church. I've been baptized. I'm really growing in my faith, and I just wanted to apologize for all the abuse I gave you. It really, really convicted me. You kept saying the truth, and I kept trying to fight it. And I eventually repented. Right?
Awesome.
Best email ever.
Yeah.
Awesome. Now, if I wasn't going out or, on a weekly basis to Union Square, would I get that letter? Nope. When I sit there and I go to the mall in the winters, and I'd go to the mall every weekend or almost every weekend to evangelize, we'd set up a table, and they limited us to once a month. So we went in under Striving Fraternity. We went in under my church at the time that I was pastoring, went under a friend's church. So we had enough guys that were at different churches that we had group organizations, so we could be there every week, pretty much. We had teenagers that we'd have witnessed to week in and week out, and they'd laugh and they would joke. And then one of their friends died eating a piece of popcorn. He choked to death. And we got there on Saturday evening, and a group of about 20 teenagers come up to us and go, "We've been waiting for you guys. You weren't here last week. You weren't here yesterday. We've been waiting for you guys. We want to know what happens after we die." And I'm like, okay, what brought on the change? They were in school, and they have all these, counselors giving them grief counseling. And this is what the one kid said. He said, our friend died, and they're giving us all these grief counselors, but these grief counselors aren't telling us the truth. You guys know what happens after we die. What happens? We need to know. Now, would that have happened if we weren't out there on a regular basis, enduring them laughing and joking and making fun of us? But guess what? When they wanted answers, they knew who had the truth. Why? Because we never backed down from it. When they would say, well, I don't believe in God, we would just say, yes, you do. God says so. We never backed down from the truth. So they knew the difference between what we were saying and what these grief counselors were saying. And the interesting thing, they were ignoring the grief counselors because they knew it wasn't true. They came to us because they knew what we said was true, and they wanted to know the truth.
Awesome.
Yeah. Now, again, that wouldn't happen had we done like more of an evidential approach.
Yep.
Because it would just be who's got better evidence. And they'd say, well, the grief counselor has better evidence than you then. But because we spoke with the authority that God is true, you know that he exists. You know that he's spoken. When they wanted truth, they came to us. They were looking for us. That's the thing I think that presuppositional apologetics gives the advantage over the others, because it's biblical, 1. 2, You don't have to be super smart and memorize lots of things to do it. You just have to study your Bible and just use that. Just take what you learn. And when people make an argument, go, well, I don't know. I'll go study it. See what God says on it. No pressure. But what we don't want to do is say, oh, let me set you up as judge and you can judge whether God exists or not. No. So I'm talking with a young man. I was in Indianapolis this past week at a conference, speaking at a regional conference for Operation Save America. And I mentioned I'm in town, and this mother contacts me, on Facebook. Don't know her. She sends me a message and says, listen, my son just came out as a theist. He says he's not a Christian anymore. Just weeks ago, he's in college. He's 18 years old, and he's come out as a theist. We don't know how to answer his questions. Would you be willing to meet with him? He grew up watching you on Apologetics Live, watching you and respects you. And, I was like, okay, sure. I'll spend time with him. I asked the, organizer of the conference, can I take some time out to do this? And they were like, yeah, go. The pastor I was staying with gave me a car. And so I met with this young man. And he's asking all kinds of really smart kid. He's asking all these philosophical questions, and I'm answering them. He's asking some scientific questions. I'm answering them. And I keep saying to him, you don't have an evidence issue. You have a sin issue. You need to repent. But I'm still going to answer the questions he's asking. I'm going to be respectful. I've spent like 5-6 hours with him. And so I'm answering the questions, and I keep pointing him back. And I said this, I said to him, Isaiah, listen, God exists. God says so. And he believes in God. He's saying he's theistic.
Yeah.
He goes, I said, so God has spoken. He goes, yeah, but how do I know Christianity is right? Okay. Now, from scripture, right? So I said, well, God has spoken. He's told us what's right. So now, can I use evidence to show what would happen in when God has spoken? Yes. So I said to him, and what I'll give you is in the back of my book, What Do They Believe? Because I never expected that to be used for evangelism, but I call this the uniqueness of Christianity. And so what makes Christianity unique is this. There's 3 elements that make Christianity unique, and these are essential because it's how we get right with God. Christianity is the only religion in the world that says God did it all. There's no human effort. In Islam, it's one good deed outweighs 10 bad. In Rabbinic Judaism, which we have today, it says doing Torah, obeying the law. In Catholicism, it's faith plus works. In Hinduism, Buddhism, it's do good deeds in this life. You'll come back better in the next life, and the next one, and the next one. So every one of them, every human religion has human effort in it, because man praises their own works.
Right.
So any religion that has any element of human works is false, because a true religion, God would do it all.
Yep.
But it's also that it's the only religion that's not a moral system. See, when it's human works, it's just morality. That's why all religions look similar. But Christianity is not about morality. It's about a person, a very special person, one that's fully God or truly God and truly man. And being truly God and truly man, he can pay an eternal fine for all people being God, because he's an eternal being. That's how he could pay that. Becoming a man, he could be a substitute for human beings. That leads into the third thing, and that is that only in Christianity can you have a God that's both just and merciful. See, in religions, they'll say, like in Islam, Allah most merciful, but he can't be just, because justice and mercy are mutually exclusive. In other words, if the law says, Andy, that if I slap you, you must slap me back, you're faced with a decision. You can slap me. If the law says you have to slap me just as hard, you can slap me just as hard, and that would be justice. You cannot slap me at all. That would be mercy. But if you slap me lightly, it's neither. It's not justice nor mercy. And so only in Christianity can you have a being that paid the full weight of sin. The eternal fine was paid on him because he is an eternal being. That's justice. Now that it's been paid, that same being can now offer mercy. The full weight was paid. Now he can offer mercy. And so what you end up seeing is it's only within Christianity that you have these elements. And so Isaiah says, so you're saying that because it's unique, it's true. I said, no. It's true, therefore it's unique. You see, what did I do? I didn't argue from like he was, from uniqueness to truth. That's evidential. I'm arguing from presupposition, right? It's true, therefore it's unique. The reason it's unique is because it's true. So how do you know it's the only religion, divine religion? Because it's the truth. And if it's the truth, it's going to be unique from every world religion in the most essential element, how we get right with God. And so I can very easily argue that the fact that they know God exists, they know he has spoken, his word tells us this is what's true, and we can look at every other world religion. I can look at the evidence of every world religion and say, God says this is true. Here's the uniqueness of it compared to every religion. And that's my, I go into more detail of it, but I have a talk that I call The Uniqueness of Christianity, where I refer to just two religions in the world, divine and man-made. And all of the ones that have works are man-made.
So just out of curiosity, how did the conversation with Isaiah end up?
Well, it ended with me giving him some things to read. He asked for some recommendations, and I'm going to follow up with him in a few weeks.
So listeners can be praying for him?
Yeah, his name's Isaiah, and really, really good kid. I told him, hey, you've been watching Apologetics live for years. How about coming on in and joining? Because that's what the show is. The show is for anyone to come in, and let me give an appeal to your audience. I was just
going to go to promotion. We're kind of getting to where we should wrap up. And
I was just going to
whatever you want. First of all,
it's on where because you said, how do people get better at this? One way they could is, if someone goes to apologeticslive.com, we have a show most Thursdays from 8 to 9 Eastern time, and you can go to apologeticslive.com and join us. And if you have a challenging question, ask us. You could come in and say, hey, I was on the street and someone said this, or a friend told me this. I didn't have a good answer. How can I answer? Because the purpose of that show is to help you improve in your apologetics. We do debates. What do I do in the middle of a debate, or if I have a discussion with someone, they come in and ask a question, I'll actually stop the discussion and explain to the audience why I'm asking the questions I'm asking. Because I don't want them just to observe it. It's not just for entertainment purposes. I want them seeing why I'm doing what I'm doing, why I'm asking those questions, what's the purpose of those things. And so I do that even in the middle of a debate. I'll do that.
Cool.
And so that's the whole purpose of that show. So yeah, if you want me to promote, that's one of the podcasts I do. My main podcast is called Andrew Rappaport's Rappaport. It's a weekly show where we're going through right now. What we're doing is going through the doctrinal statement at Striving for Eternity and explaining why we wrote it the way we did, what's all behind it. We just finished up angels, and so we're gonna move into some other. So we're basically going through a systematic theology right now, but we deal with other topics as well. I actually will have my next episode will be where I was on someone else's podcast where we discussed Leviticus 14 and leprosy. Sounds boring. How do you apply that today? Well, actually, we could. There's a lot of ways it applies, and people don't think about that. They usually just avoid Leviticus altogether. People can find more about me at strivingforeternity.org. They can get my books, What Do We Believe and What Do They Believe? One's a systematic theology of world religions. One's a systematic theology of the Christian religion. You could figure it out, right? What they believe, what we believe. But and so,
of course, Christian podcast community, which I'm a part of, but I don't talk about it enough. So
as long as
you're here, I want to use the opportunity to talk about it. So the
Christian podcast community, and you could go to christianpodcastcommunity.org. We have over 50 vetted podcasts. We do not make it easier. Andy, you're a friend of mine. You've been my friend for years. Yep. You still had to go through the whole rigorous treatment.
Yep. I had my lawyer look over the contract, and that is not a joke.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. And so, we have, I had a gentleman that contacted me. He said to his wife, he says, I said to my wife, I had to fill out 2 forms, and now I got an interview just to get on. I said, well, if it makes you feel any better, you're still going to have one more form and a contract you have to sign, but we vet people. So, when you get people that are on there, and we reject like 70% of the podcasts. So it's tough. We don't make it easy, and because we want people with good content, good quality, and good theology. And so what ends up happening there is you can have, if you listen to just the Christian Podcast Community RSS feed, you're going to get over 50 episodes a week and like 30 hours of content, and it's always growing.
Yeah.
We just recently hit 3 million downloads, and
Awesome.
we had almost 94,000 downloads last month.
Awesome.
Just shy of 94,000. And so, we keep growing, we keep having people joining, and so it's one place you can go, and we got something for everyone. You get homeschooling, theology, apologetics, sermons, interviews. I mean, we have something for everybody. And so you could just go to christianpodcastcommunity.org. My show in 2 weeks will be on my Rappaport show is going to be with one of our fellow podcasters, Voice of Reason Radio.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I end up sometimes finding out that my friends who I've been friends with for a while didn't know they were a member. And Chris was one of those where he was a member for a while before I realized, oh, Chris is in there too, huh?
Yeah. And then you had Gene on, and I mean, there's a lot of, and that's the thing that we offer for, a lot of us are just looking at, okay, we have fellow podcasters that we could do, that we can interview and things like that. So that works really well, for that.
Cool.
And so, strivingforeternity.org is kind of the home for all of that.
Yep.
So
cool. Well, anything else you want to throw in before we close? Or?
No, I think I covered that. I'd encourage people to go and follow the podcasts, Andrew Rappaport's Rappaport, and Rap is with 2 P's, and Apologetics Live. That'd be good.
And we'll put it in the show notes. This is episode 168. So echozoe.com/168. And we'll put all that stuff in there.
Yeah, and I can come to your church, and we travel and speak at churches and do weekend seminars as well. So, and we don't have a speaking fee. So
awesome. Cool. Well, thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure being on here. I know I always look forward to December when we get to do the roundtable.
I do too. That's one of my favorites, having a regular with Fred. And so you'll be back in December, I take it?
I'm always happy to come back on.
Cool. Well,
I love Echo Zoe Radio. So
I'll talk to you then. Thanks.
Echo Zoe Radio is an outreach of Echo Zoe Ministries. If you are blessed by the show, please consider offering your support. There are many things you can do to help, including prayer, sharing the show with others, and your financial support. Echo Zoe Ministries is a registered nonprofit organization with 501c3 tax-exempt status, and your donations are tax deductible. For more information about how you can support Echo Zoe Ministries, please visit echozoe.com/support.
That wraps up episode 168. Thanks for listening to Echo Zoe Radio. For show notes, you can come on over to echozoe.com/168. Also, remember to check out Locals, echozoe.locals.com. That's LOCALS.com. You can support the ministry there as well as interact with the community. And remember, Friday, April 15th, Jerusalem's King will be up at the Locals page. So come on over and see the film, and I look forward to seeing you at the community. With that said, Lord willing, we will be back next month with the May episode of Echo Zoe Radio.